Welcome to The Secret Life of Mothers. My name is Maggie Gordon-Walker and I'm the founder of Mothers Uncovered. Join us as we explore and share the incredible hidden stories of mothers when life has thrown at them challenge. Discover how the skills we learn in matrescence, which means becoming a mother, can teach us about more than motherhood. They teach us about unconditional love, resilience and acceptance. I'm joined today by Charlotte Faircloth. Charlotte is Professor of Family and Society at the UCL Social Research Institute and co-director of the Thomas Coram Research Unit. She's one of the directors of the UCL Centre for Human Reproduction, where she leads Repro at UCL, a network for social science and humanities scholars working on reproduction-related topics. She's currently leading a large UKRI funded study entitled 50 Years of Becoming a Mother, with Institute colleagues Anne Oakley and Meg Wiggins, revisiting Anne's 1970s landmark study of the same name. Charlotte, welcome to The Secret Life of Mothers.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I said repro, I'm thinking it probably should be in repro. It's because I said reproduction, it was still in my mind. It is repro, is it? Repro.
Right, either's fine, yeah.
So, Charlotte, where in the country are you based? And is this the same area as you grew up?
It's not, no. I'm currently based in London, which is where I live with my husband and 4 children. But I grew up in Devon, in the southwest.
In a nice small village in the countryside, I'm wondering.
Yeah, it was.
You
It
run
was
around
fairly,
in the fields.
yeah, it was, looking back on it from the perspective of adulthood, it was quite idyllic, really. You know, it was a thatched cottage in a village, sort of on the outskirts of Exeter. And again, looking at it as an adult, I now see that it was sort of a commuter village, I suppose, for Exeter. But of course, that's not how I understood it at the time. But yeah, it was a small place where we had dogs and cats and a pony that a farmer would let us use. And given the sort of childhood my children have in grimy Upper Holloway, it looks quite different.
Just settle something. Is it jam first, then cream, or the other way around?
Oh, well, no. I mean, I'm actually with the Cornish on this, but don't tell anyone from Devon. I think actually having the cream second is the way to do it. But anyway,
good. Well, I've got that cleared up. Anyone who wants to take issue can do so, not to be. Great. So what would we need to know about you to understand how you would describe yourself as a mother?
I mean, I suppose it's probably fairly obvious that that how I describe myself as a mother is really influenced by the kind of work that I'm doing, and possibly that has been a big driver for the work that I'm doing, an interest in motherhood, even before I was a mother, because I knew it was something that I wanted to be when I grew up. I think has always been at the heart of my kind of academic studies, and therefore, has become a really integral part of my career. Obviously, being an academic doesn't just involve research, but it's certainly been the kind of driving thread, I'd say, intellectually for the projects that I've done. Yeah.
Yes, and you certainly are a mother to 4. That's that's a lot. That must be busy in your household, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your youngest they're all under 10, I think, aren't they? Or the oldest might be
that's right. Yeah, littlest has just turned 2. Yeah, so still
right. Wow. You look very radiant for someone who's probably still coping with sleepless nights.
Well, I don't know, but it's probably good that this is just being audio recorded, but anyway. Thank you.
Let's talk a bit then about you becoming a mother. So you said, yes, just then as well, you knew you always wanted to become a mother, but it was difficult, and you had years of fertility treatment. Perhaps you could talk to us a little bit about your journey there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny now, having had the children, I guess I feel a lot more able to talk about it, but it was definitely not something I was able to talk about for years and years and years. I sort of first became interested, I guess, in motherhood academically when I was an undergraduate student in Cambridge doing archaeology and anthropology, and read this amazing book by Emily Martin, an anthropologist, called I can't remember the name. It's something like a cultural analysis of reproduction, and it was sort of using Marxist models to think about reproduction. It was just really brilliant kind of breakdown of a lot of the textbooks that are used, and so that was sort of how I became interested in it academically. It really grew from there. I did an undergraduate project about birth, but the more I wanted to talk about birth, the more the mothers wanted to talk about breastfeeding or not breastfeeding, as the case may be. And that sort of became the basis for my master's and then my PhD. And anyway, here we are. But I think sort of that was way before I became a mother, and I had known that it was something I wanted to do, although how consciously and reflexively that was done, I still, don't really know. I think I just assumed it was something I would do. And therefore, when it proved to be very difficult, that was, really, really hard. Particularly, I think, because there's this very distinct feeling, around that stage of your life of a kind of a cohort and everybody kind of moving on into this next chapter or crossing this kind of Rubicon that, we just sort of couldn't do. And that was quite painful. And whilst that having babies is not a zero-sum game, me having a baby does not mean anything as to whether you can have a baby or not. It does sort of, you end up sort of internalizing it a bit like that. So every announcement from, a friend, it would be like, oh God, even though you're also very happy for them. So yeah, anyway, I think it's fairly classic story, I suppose, of just, lots of different diagnoses, but also misdiagnoses and transfers between various hospitals and delays and all of that kind of thing. Anyway, we did eventually manage to have our son, who's approaching sort of 10, scarily enough, and then assumed we'd have to go through lots more treatment again, and sort of did, and then actually it didn't work that time around. So then we were really heartbroken, because I think it's a very different kind of pain in secondary infertility, because you sort of know, I think if you have siblings as well and it's something that you want for your child, that's kind of a different sort of loss, I guess. And then we sort of gave up, and his first sister came along, but that, I think in my head, it was still very hard to get pregnant. So then when the third one just sort of happened, it was like, oh well, this is amazing. You can sort of just have a baby for free. I still can't really believe it. But yeah, the threeness then felt a bit odd, and four then was definitely enough. So yeah, that's sort of it wasn't at all planned in the sense of always wanting four children or anything like that. But I do think that there is something that if one has been through fertility treatment and seeing those kind of, every single stage of the process and how susceptible to failure they are, it really does seem miraculous that you can, have sex and have a baby. It's still, I'm like, this is
the old-fashioned way.
Like, why don't more people do it? And you're like, oh right, yeah, of course, that's how probably most people do it. But yeah. But anyway, four is certainly, a lot. And I think in current way that we sort of structure society, and, most houses in London require two of you to be earning, and, we both have very full-time careers. That's brings its own kind of pressures. So, yeah.
So how, when you managed to get pregnant for the first time, did you feel kind of anxious throughout that time because you thought, oh, this has been such a journey to get here and I can't believe it's actually happening? Or were you able to relax?
It was very interesting. Yeah, you'd sort of think that you would be like hyper anxious. And I know a lot of people are actually, because they have invested so much in, getting to that point, that then they're extremely risk averse during pregnancy and with their birth kind of planning and all of that. But interestingly, I wasn't. I remember doing a sort of home pregnancy test and finding out I was pregnant and sort of thinking, well, why do I need to go to the clinic to have a blood test as well to confirm it? This is ridiculous. They're just trying to upsell us things that we don't need to do, which interestingly wasn't how I felt sort of, all the times that it then, failed and had lots of miscarriages and things. But in that first pregnancy, I think I was just really high on sort of being pregnant and finally having sort of made it into this normal status or something. And but it did feel very odd. I remember going to my sort of booking appointment with the midwife, and then because you stopped having this very intensive sort of monitoring from the IVF clinic, just sort of wanting to be like, I'm pregnant through IVF or whatever, because you just kind of, yeah, you can't believe that you're just being considered like a normal pregnant person.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it was an odd one. Yeah.
Yeah. And did that sort of feeling pervade throughout your pregnancy? You felt like you were in a slightly different camp to the mothers who'd conceived, or
Slightly,
women who'd
yeah,
conceived
slightly, yeah,
naturally.
I guess so. Um, but there's also this kind of delight at being able to pass, as kind of normal. And actually, I remember speaking about this with a friend who also struggled, or had to go through a lot of fertility treatment. And when she did finally get pregnant, she conceived twins. And she was sort of obviously delighted in some ways, but also just wanted to kind of be normal, not be kind of odd. And I guess it's increasingly common that you would conceive twins through fertility treatment. And so it was less sort of, it's less easy to then pass. And I guess, it's a character thing. Some people are more bothered about fitting in or standing out than other people. And certainly for me at that point, because I think I was feeling quite fragile about it all, as a researcher on motherhood of all things, it was nice to be able to not have to reveal that too publicly at that
Yes.
point. But yeah, it was quite interesting because my first baby was breech, and presented as breech kind of almost all the way through the pregnancy. And of course, the hospital were very keen that I had a C-section, because that's the kind of current advice. But I think I'd really like drunk the Kool-Aid on the kind of hypnobirthing kind of world, and was, quite resistant to that, and, tried all sorts of, crazy things now. I look back at it to try and get him to turn. But anyway, did yeah, none of which worked, including a kind of ECV, which is when they try and manually kind of rotate the baby,
Yeah.
which did work for later pregnancies, but not in the first one. Um, so anyway, I'd when I did sort of go into labour a bit earlier than expected, they were sort of saying, right, well, obviously we'll take you straight through to theatre. And I said, no, 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 I just want a bit more time. Sometimes they turn in labour, and let's see, and sort of held off and held off and held off. And anyway, I can't remember, 50 something hours later, he still hadn't been
Wow.
born. And I finally sort of signed the consent form for an emergency section, which had always sort of been the plan, a planned emergency
Okay.
section. And then I think because I obviously relaxed or something, he then was just kind of born. And given it was a very busy teaching hospital in sort of central London, there were loads of other emergencies, more actual emergency than me. So by the time I got to the theatre, they said, oh, right, we might have to sort of push him back in now if we want to do the section. So I said, no, no, let's not do that. And so he was actually born breech, which is also, quite unusual these
My
days.
goodness.
Yeah, particularly for
How
first.
interesting. But it just shows the power of the body, doesn't it? I
Mm,
mean,
yeah,
as you
yeah.
said earlier, you relaxed for subsequent pregnancies and it became easier to conceive. And here, because you said, okay, I give up. And like you'd already, as you say, had it in your back pocket that you might have to have this procedure. And then
Yeah,
he just started to come anyway. Wow.
yeah. And I think it was really helped by having there was a great midwife there who was actually from Poland, I think originally. That's where she'd done her training. And there, I think the practice is that you can still, obviously you can if you want to, birth breech babies. And so she was extremely relaxed about it, unlike the consultant who was definitely not relaxed about it at all. But yeah, so I think, it's funny how particularly in that kind of laboring process, your mind sort of latches onto a particular authority figure, and she was definitely my sort of like the person that I
Yeah,
would
yeah.
listen to,
Oh,
and that was helpful
good
for
you
me. And
had
that meant,
her then.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was luck.
It is interesting. It's one of my passions is, for investment into that whole period so that you would get to know so maybe three or four midwives, and one of them would definitely be there for you to deliver your baby. Because for me, I remember I'd been there with the midwife through most of my labour. And she
Hmm.
said, oh, I'll be here till the end. But then, of course, it went on long. And I looked up suddenly and she'd gone. And I felt like my whole world had fallen apart because that was the one thing that was keeping me going was that
Yeah.
person.
I
So
mean, that continuity of care, it's been talked about for years and years and years in, midwifery. It's just so hard to sort of ensure it, particularly at these enormous kind of, hospitals, like I say, and yeah, shift working and all the rest of it. But yeah, it would be great, it would be lovely. I don't think I saw the same person twice during,
really,
any of my 4 pregnancies at the same hospital. Yeah.
really,
Um,
yeah.
but that's just,
Yeah, and I think it's more than it just would be. Not, I think the outcomes would be so much better. You'd have a lot more births that were less traumatic, which then would save infinite amounts of money in later stage care when women are developing depression and needing care for other physical injuries as well. It's yeah. Anyway, but politics aside, uh, so you had him in the end. So he was naturally born in the end after 50 odd hours of labour.
I mean, God knows how long it was, in 70 something, I think. But yeah, yeah,
Wow.
finally arrived.
And were there many? Did you had your husband there? Presumably, any other sort of family members there at the time, or was it just the two of you?
No, it was a good couple of weeks earlier than anticipated. So
Yeah,
actually, my mum had come up to London to see me because I just finished work that Friday.
okay.
And I think also that was part of the reason, going into labour, finally kind of relaxed because I'd marked my final exam script or whatever it was.
Yeah,
So she came and saw us in the hospital just after he'd been born, which she probably otherwise wouldn't have done. But no, it was just us. Yeah, in
okay.
the. I mean, I say just us, obviously, because it was a breech birth, which never gets seen. There were like 15 or 20 people watching. I mean, it was like not at
Nice.
you know,
That's what
it
you want
wasn't the kind
when
of
you're exposed, literally and metaphorically.
yeah, it was not the kind of relaxed birth centre or at home kind of experience, because obviously they were quite anxious about the whole thing. But anyway, there we
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Anyway, so he arrived, and obviously, as you say, had been much longed for. And then you said you found it extremely challenging those first sort of few months, partly because you'd done studies about it. So therefore you thought, I know what to expect, I'm prepared, and then found that you weren't. So perhaps you could talk us through some of your thought processes and feelings around that.
Yeah, I mean, God, the irony of it all. By this point, I'd published a book called Militant Lactivism, all about this sort of pressure I think that there is on mothers to breastfeed, but also to adopt quite a lot of kind of attachment parenting-y style, styles of caring for children, or rather, it was a kind of cultural critique of attachment parenting. Not a criticism, but just it was based on my fieldwork with lots of mothers who kind of practice this philosophy. And I remember sort of finding some of their reasoning for that like a bit sort of problematic, So, oh, well, if we were just any other primate, we would, the evolutionary kind of blueprint, we would all be breastfeeding to age 7 or, whatever it might be. And I always sort of find that logic a little bit difficult, if you're trying, it can be very deterministic about what women should be doing with their bodies, essentially. So it's
Mm.
that kind of like, anthropological critique, I guess. And then, of course, I had this baby who, possibly like all babies, but he was very, very small. Well, not like worryingly small, but I think he was
Mm.
just 6 pounds, so like pretty small. And
Not uncommon for him being 2 weeks early. I mean, that we would
exactly,
have
yeah, just,
expected that. Yeah.
um, and obviously, I think, first baby, like knowing how to feed and all this kind of stuff, you don't necessarily know what you're doing. So there was a lot of kind of worry about him being small, and the fact that we'd had a really long labour and he wasn't sort of, he was tired obviously by that. But yeah, just I think I had this vision, which is now hilarious, because I'd been doing all these interviews with mothers for years of having a baby, and it was always this almost like an inert kind of object that you could put in the travel, the car seat, and would just sort of sit in the car seat quietly, or put in the pram and you would just go for your walk, or I don't know what I was thinking. But then, of course, you have this baby and it's like, it's just not like that at all. I basically
No.
couldn't put him down. I actually have a photo from when he's about 7 or 8 weeks, which I snapped when he was in that kind of little bouncy chair thing, the baby Bjorn, because that was the first time I'd been able to like put him down for that long. And then I pretty much immediately had to pick him up. And I was so kind of blindsided by that. And then obviously really exhausted because he was on me sort of day and night. And of course, even if my husband was trying to sort of help, I'd be like, no, 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 it should be, exclusive breastfeeding, and I know what I'm doing and you don't know what you're doing. And yeah, just got absolutely exhausted. Did not sleep for more than maybe, I think 3 hours was like the longest stretch I got for 3 or 4 months. And you start going a little bit kind of doolally. But of course,
Sure,
if someone
sleep torture is a thing after all.
yeah. And, I think because I was very keen to show how competent I was at this and I could do it, didn't really want to tell anyone how hard it was, a bit like, the IVF. And yeah, the irony, of course, of like having written this kind of critique of breastfeeding, and for the record, I do think there is far too much pressure on women to breastfeed. But what I think I hadn't kind of understood is that even though I could write all of this and I stand by it, I hadn't realized how deeply under the skin all of this stuff gets. So there I was, running around North London, desperately seeking out lactation consultants and drop-ins and, all this kind of stuff, because yeah, I just was sort of desperate to do what I felt like I ought to be doing. And it was just really hard. And I think people talk to you about feeling tired, but I didn't feel tired. I felt like wired. I was just like kind of jittery with, yeah, like almost like a nervous kind of exhaustion, not a, I couldn't sleep because I just sort of lost the ability to.
You're running on adrenaline basically,
Yeah.
24/7, I guess, which is
Yeah.
not a relaxing state to be in.
No.
And yes, you had all these pressures of, like you say, they all around you. There's that, pressures, as you say, to breastfeed, pressures on mothers for a whole host of things about, how you choose how they sleep. Do you let them cry?
Yeah.
What buggy do you have? Except it goes on and on and on. And it's a
Yeah.
constant litany of thinking, am I doing it right? And looking around and checking everybody else and
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
more inadequate.
And I think also I was really struck, and again, like now I look back, I do think, gosh, birth itself is like such a kind of, it's so wild however you do it, whether that is with a planned section that is done, absolutely according to how everyone wants it to and calmly and all of that. It's wild, like one minute the baby sort of exists in the world and, previously they kind of haven't. But obviously having been through that kind of birth and sort of really feeling like I was being very, I don't know what quite like empowered, I guess, by doing that. I now look back and think, God, was that really foolhardy? Because things could have gone really wrong. But I think that is quite a common experience for everybody, because obviously any way of doing it could have gone really horribly wrong. But it's one of the few moments in your life where you are, assuming one hasn't had to go through lots of surgery or had a horrible illness or something, you're suddenly really in touch with mortality, your own and this baby's, in a way that you're just not really in the usual scheme of things. So I kept having these kind of flashbacks to like, oh God, was that, really ridiculously risky? And I still wonder, had it been, that had been my fourth delivery instead of my first, would I have done it the same way? But yeah, who knows? I guess we all ask ourselves these kind of questions, don't we?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, my oldest is 21 now, so it's a long time since he was born, but I can still remember everything. There's a weird parallel of forgetting vast amounts of what happened, the sort of medical side, but remembering all the details of the room and, various other things. I think, you could ask a 90-year-old
Mm.
woman and she would remember giving
Yeah.
birth sort of 65 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
And there is like, the mortality you are, and I think that is something that frightens a lot of women into thinking, well, I would like for me, I wanted to be in a pool, but they said you're
Mhm.
bleeding too much. But
Mhm.
my body knew it needed to be in water, but I didn't, and therefore the labour went on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
But there's always this sort of spectre, oh, you could be harming your baby if you don't do what we say. And it's a
Yeah.
kind of, it's an unequal dialogue, I would say, between
Yeah.
you, who's in a state of extreme anxiety and pain and all of this stuff, and medical people around them. And it's an
Mm.
interesting situation, definitely.
Definitely is. Yeah.
But things settled down for you, after a while, I'm assuming, and you
Yeah.
started to embrace it more. And
Yeah. I mean, I am not somebody, it's kind of funny, I guess, having four children, because everyone assumes that you love babies. And I'm not really brilliant with babies. I find it really difficult. I think my character is as someone who quite likes to get things done. And of course, that's sort of, you really have to
you
sort
never get things done as a baby. As soon as one thing's done, another thing is
of,
undone.
exactly. And I just remember these days where, like, emptying the dishwasher felt like it had been a major achievement. And I was like, oh God, and I should have just sat and enjoyed that time on the sofa, but I'm just not able to kind of, so I would be sort of holding the baby and trying to do the dishwasher and the laundry and also like, renew my life insurance or whatever. It's just kind of, because I just sort of couldn't settle to not doing. And I think that's, that was probably a bit of a reaction actually against that state of things, and I'm sure that was my own coping strategy. But yeah, I it did of course settle down, and yeah, but the one good thing I guess about having loads of kids is that you know that it's quite transient actually. And by the fourth one, I think I finally was able to, you know, be like, okay, you've only got actually a month or two where you can sit down and watch some, a Netflix series in the daytime,
Yeah.
on a
How
Monday morning
decadent.
at 10 o'clock after the nursery drop or something for a few hours and, do a few emails and things. And because before very long, they need entertaining and then you're really stuffed, So, yeah, but actually, the other nice thing about having a bit of a reasonable spread in ages is that I now know that, like, for me, what I envisaged about how I envisaged being a mother was much more about mothering, children of, let's say, ages, 5, 6, 7 onwards. And I love that. I absolutely love spending time with them at that kind of age, even though I find the sort of babies and toddlers, sweet or hilarious or whatever in their own way, but really frustrating as well. So yeah, it's nice to know that it's not all about whether you love babies, and you can accept that actually that doesn't play to your own strengths as a person, but maybe other
Mm.
chapters of childhood, and hopefully their adulthood, will do. So yeah, I finally got a bit of perspective on it, I guess. So even though I still found it, really hard with the fourth one, it was like, okay, that you just got to ride this out, and then it does get a lot easier. So
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, when people imagine mothers, it is always mothers with babe in arms, and yet that, as you say, is quite a short fight. It feels forever when you're in it, getting
yeah.
no sleep, and the endless nappy changes, or toilet training, etc.
Hmm.
But yes, you have far more time when they're out of that baby stage.
Yeah.
What's the age gap between your first and second?
3.5 years. So, not obviously, that's not how we kind of wanted it to be, but yeah. And then the others are all kind of almost exactly 2 years apart. The number 2 and 3 have the same birthday, 2 years apart.
Okay.
And then number 4, it has, it's like a week or so earlier, kind of 2 years apart. So,
So that's an expensive month in your household then.
yeah, it's yeah, not brilliant, not brilliant for financial planning. Yeah.
So yes, your career, because obviously you were successful already as an academic, and yes, you worked full time as does your husband. So yeah, how does that manage then with you with your career and wanting to build on your studies about motherhood and also mothering yourself? Like, what's the kind of the to and fro on that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's really funny, when you apply for promotion in academic posts, at least, or possibly in other posts. There's a kind of space for what's called like a personal statement. So that's where you list anything that might have kind of impeded your academic progress. So for example, periods of sick leave or maternity leave or whatever. But when you actually list it all, including stuff to do with my parents or COVID, that obviously all happened, and kind of like, oh wow, this is amazing. I have a career at all. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I think, what do I think? I think I've been very lucky with where I work. I have really amazing, wonderful colleagues, but also very supportive policy around parental leave, which is sort of relatively generous, in the sector, but also this scheme, called a returner's sabbatical, when after a period of parental leave, mothers and fathers can take a term of what's effectively kind of research sabbatical to kind of get your head back in the research space. And that was kind of how I've managed to, publish books or write grant proposals or keep any kind of trajectory, I guess, career wise, because in the normal run of things, when you're doing a lot of teaching or administrative work, with like departmental roles, it is very hard to keep any research going. So that has been exceptionally helpful for me, and I'm really grateful for that. But also, I think, who your partner is makes a massive difference.
Mm.
My husband has been, you know, whatever, obviously we talk about this a lot, but he has always tried to support me however he can. He's just sort of always tried to make sure that I'm flourishing professionally. And that's sometimes easier than others. There is a bit of a zero-sum game actually when it comes to your time as a couple when you have children, because suddenly where one of you could be out at one work event on a Tuesday and the other one at the last minute gets an invite to another work event on the same Tuesday, you could have both gone before you had children. Suddenly
Mm,
it becomes a kind of, well, if I'm doing this, you can't do that, or you have to, find somebody that can look after your, 4 children, which in our case is very expensive, and there's a very limited number of people that we would feel comfortable sort of doing that with. So yeah, there are logistical challenges to it, and London, I think, is, commutes and all of that kind of stuff. It is a bit of a grind. It's very expensive. It is pretty grim quite a lot of the time. But I think, both of us kind of realize how important our careers are to the other.
mm,
Um, Obviously pays the bills for one thing, but also a
yes.
sense of identity beyond the domestic, and but also within the domestic. I've always felt that the fact that I work is kind of important, for the children, and not only in terms of role modeling, although obviously it is important for that, but just kind of, um, the kind of work that I do and sort of trying to make things better, for example, kind of like the work you do, trying to think about
Mm,
how can we actually make things better for people trying to have children? Why is it
mm,
that we're still sort of asking for the same things that we were asking for, years and years and years ago?
mm.
So yeah, I think having some kind of social consciousness is helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as well what you say about work, showing your children, you're not just their parent, you are a person in your own right, because it's not doing them any favors to make them the center of your world to the exclusion of everything else.
No,
They have to understand that you you are a person, you have your own needs, your own desires, your own work. As
mm,
much as you love them and put them, they're hugely important to you. It's yeah,
no, I mean,
it's always a juggle.
I regularly, you know, there are regular times where I wish I was a bit less busy and a bit less snappy
Sure.
with them. Don't get me wrong, that I am not sort of, but there is this kind of myth that like you can do it all, and you can, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're necessarily doing it well or
Yeah.
kind of enjoying it all the time. I'm often really tired and a bit annoyed with them, and just sort of want them to get into bed and all of that stuff, which might be something to do with the fourness, or it might just be working life and having small children. But I should also say, obviously, that, and I dedicated the book that I managed to kind of finally publish during the pandemic to her. We have a long-standing, long-suffering nanny called Claire who has worked with us for nearly 10 years, and she has been, you know, an absolute cornerstone in our lives. Like there is no way, I don't think we would have had a number 3 and definitely not a number 4 without a Claire, because we don't have family nearby, and she has been, she is such an important person to our kids and also, to the two of us. She has 4 children of her own, lives very nearby. She's a very busy woman, but I thank my lucky stars, daily that she came into our lives, because, yeah, that kind of warmth and affection and, all of that she brings to our household has been, absolutely, yeah, priceless.
Yeah. Well, you do. I mean, that's what they say. You need the village around you, and increasingly, people have babies later and not living
Hmm.
in the area they grew up in. Obviously, I presume your
Yeah.
family are down in Devon.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yes, you have to find those other people, and not everyone does. And yeah, that's why I set up Mothers Uncovered, as a
Mm.
space for them to try and create, at least with each other, that kind of sense of community.
Yeah.
So yes, let's talk then a bit about the becoming a mother, because I'm sort
Mm.
of tangentially involved in that. I went to the launch, and we're thinking of ways in which we might be further involved. Do you want to talk a little bit about what drew you to it, and how? Obviously, there's things you can't share yet because it's research, so it has to be kept under wraps. But just how generally it's been going.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the name Anne Oakley will be familiar to lots of people, but particularly to students of sociology. And so I remember encountering her work. I studied social anthropology, but she's also very influential in that field. And when I was interested in reproduction, coming across her kind of history of pregnancy care. And when I joined UCL, I remember thinking, God, I'm joining the same department as Anne Oakley. This is, incredible. And I very shyly sort of approached her, asking if she might consider being my mentor. And she very kindly said yes. And of course, when you meet these big names, they turn out to be real people and nice and all of these things. But I remember being quite sort of intimidated by her, and still am on a regular basis. And anyway, that was back in 2017, and I was sort of conscious of her becoming a mother study that she'd done in the 1970s, which was one of the first sort of social science accounts of motherhood, and actually taking it seriously as a topic for academic study, which now we don't think of as particularly, unusual, but then was considered really, radical / ridiculous. And she managed to get a sort of pot of money from the Social Science Research Council, which then went on to become the Economic and Social Research Council, to do this study with around 55 women making the transition to motherhood for the first time at a West London hospital. And she interviewed them twice during pregnancy and twice afterwards. They were largely sort of white, English and Irish, kind of middle and working class women. And that study sort of became very influential, and at the time taken up by kind of quite a lot of, maternity activist groups like AIMS, for example, and quite influential in changing policy towards being a bit more mother-centred, away from a very patriarchal, medicalised kind of style. And then Anne obviously went on to kind of have a, really kind of stellar career, and she did lots of other things aside from work on motherhood. But amidst all of that, did actually revisit these women around kind of 37 years later. And so we were sort of, and had contact details from them. And then also did a repeat of that same original study at the same hospital, actually a few years before that, to kind of do a kind of historical comparison of how things had changed. So anyway, very long story short, when I joined UCL, I was aware that it was going to be like 50 years coming up of a 50-year anniversary of that original study happening in the 70s. And I said to her in those really early days, I'd really love to put together a proposal to revisit that. What would you think about following up the original mothers and also repeating the study for a third time, as it were, or rather, repeating it for a second time, so that we had then three kind of studies and also 3 follow-ups with these original women. Perhaps we could also speak to any of their daughters that would be interested, whether they've had children or not had children. That was something we talked about at the launch. Possibly any granddaughters as well. And yeah, we were lucky enough to get it was £1 million from the ESRC, which is, it's really hard to come by research money these days. So I was really delighted, but there was like blood, sweat and tears that went into that proposal, particularly in the midst of, lots of children and COVID and all the rest of it. And they took a very long time to kind of tell us that we'd, got the money. But anyway, we finally launched the project in February this year. And we have been recruiting other team members. So there's me, Anne Oakley and Meg Wiggins are the kind of project leaders. Meg is a very long-standing, colleague of Anne's in a sister kind of unit within the Social Research Institute, where we all are based, and has worked with Anne for many years. So actually did some of these follow-up interviews already and the repeat study. So she knows the project kind of inside out. And we've just recently recruited a couple of postdocs, one kind of leading on analysing the original material, which has now been digitised and beautifully presented by the British Library, one of our partners. So they've kind of digitised the original cassettes and got them transcribed, which is amazing as a researcher, instead of relying on these kind of handwritten notes and, some sort of typed up bits from the time. And she's called Kate Errington. And she's sort of wonderful. She just finished her PhD about sort of risk and pregnancy and how that's been communicated. And then we've just recruited a second postdoc called Rachel Arkle, who also has finished a PhD, again, about the use of epilepsy medication during pregnancy, but has done lots of work with kind of BPAS, the abortion provider, but also the Policy Research Unit on Reproduction Services at UCL. So I'm really thrilled about her joining us. She's going to be leading on the kind of new study at the same hospital 50 years on. And that will hopefully be getting going next year because it takes a long time to get ethics clearance, as I'm sure you're aware. But amidst all of that, we have been setting up the interviews with the original mothers. So Anne and Meg are starting those really, really soon, which is wonderful. And we also, after we got the award, were lucky enough to get a kind of PhD studentship for Sasha Lawson, who has just started being co-supervised by me and a very good colleague called Lisa Baretza at Birkbeck, who I encountered years ago through her work on the kind of ethics of maternal interruption and how that's a kind of a state of mind, I guess, for mothers. And she's going to be looking at how a more sort of involved fatherhood has affected women's experience of motherhood over the last 50 years. It was nice. It's all kind of getting going. We finally got our website together, and but it is frustratingly slow in academia. I'm not going to lie. Just everything, takes a very long time.
But I know people who are in it, and certainly any time we've wanted to do any kind of project, ethics clearance, it's like waiting for Godot. Godot never arrives. The clearance never comes. Well, it does eventually, but it takes a long time. What's interesting is obviously Anne's book came out not long after Dana Raphael coined the word matrescence. That was 1973, I think. I mean, I presume they weren't aware of each other because the world wasn't as connected then. But it's interesting that they're both around because that's what becoming a mother means. It's interesting. And now, obviously, I'm sure the word will feature in any kind of writing you do about it because it's becoming much more common. Although not everywhere. I was with a group of health visitors only a week or so ago, and out of 12 of them, only one of them had even heard the word. Oh, wow. So it's interesting how, you and I think everyone must know it because we work in this kind of area, but it really isn't that common.
That kind of trickle down.
So obviously, you're becoming a mother for you didn't change what you were doing because you were doing various topics and you were already studying motherhood, but it's probably changed you as a person, I would say. What ways do you think it might have changed you?
I mean, it's so difficult, isn't it, to say, because you're kind of dealing with like counterfactuals, maybe parts of me were always going to develop in this way or not or whatever. But I mean, I remember this feeling very distinctly of being kind of humbled by it, and I don't mean that in a good way. Like I was really shown my limits of like physical and mental kind of endurance, I think, with the first one in particular, and being kind of, always previously been someone who had sort of worked to basically bend the world to their will, like however I needed to, just working harder, doing more treatment, doing this, whatever it took. And then suddenly just realizing that I sort of, I just couldn't, it was just bigger than that or something, and so that was quite humbling. But I think that is possibly quite a good thing, to realize that and to sort of accept that. I don't know. I think for a long time I really struggled with it because I felt like I was being judged for how this baby, behaved or whatever, which you kind of are. But it really helped me when I was able to kind of see him as his own person. And that, lots of people have written about this, lots of anthropologists, and that sort of separation, actually, when he started sleeping, in fact, in his own bed and for stretches longer than 3 hours at a time, it was like I was able to kind of like take a breath and then actually look at him as not just as a kind of extension of myself, but as his own person with his own agency and his own kind of characteristics and all of that. And that then gave me sort of space to be myself as well. But until that point, it was really very fraught, I think. Yeah.
Yes, like you say, you can't cut yourself in half and know what you would have been like had you not become a mother.
I know, but I would have been really sad. The thing is, often sometimes kind of it's not a choice that you can't make it in an informed way. That's the difficult thing about it, because once you've done it, it's kind of too late to change your mind. And there's loads of work out there at the moment, coming forth with women sort of saying, I regret motherhood and but that's very different to not being able to do it if you wanted to, or choosing not to do it, before you have had the children and then realized you actually really hate it. And I know that if we hadn't had children, much as I struggle with it, these days and find it really hard sometimes, I would be desperately sad, because it was, it did really consume me then. So it wouldn't be someone who's experienced it and then going back and being, oh, actually, it's quite nice being childbirth. It would be someone who felt very stuck and very sad about, not being able to make that step.
Yes, it is interesting because obviously, we are as a species compelled by our biology, and biology does tell women to produce children, and yet, not all women have that, and that's obviously absolutely fine, but it is there for a majority, I would say, of women, that desire to have a child. And it's not, it's a kind of multifaceted sort of feeling, and it's not really very something in your head. It's just kind of an urge, isn't it? An ache in your body. But but as you say, it is humbling, because you realize, oh yeah, I wanted this, but actually this is a person who is not me once they're out of me, and I have to deal with them and their development.
Yeah.
So if you were, the day before he was born in 2016, if you were to write a letter to yourself with some advice, what do you think it would be?
I mean, it all just sounds so cliched, and I wouldn't have been able to hear it. That's, even if I'd been reading this letter, I just wouldn't have understood what on earth this person was talking about, because you just don't have a frame of reference for it. The kind of the absolutely kind of overwhelming dependency of these small babies, and the need to be there. They need someone with them every moment of every day. That's just kind of wild, right? So yeah, I think, what would I say? I mean, I'd probably try and persuade myself to try and, kind of lean into the loss of control a bit and accept that it's a phase, and it all comes out in the wash, not sweat the small stuff, but also that kind of good enough is good enough. I think I spend a lot, this kind of stuff I write about, like I spend a lot of time, worrying about, oh, should we have done this? Should we have done that? Did I, breastfeed exclusively for long enough? All of this kind of stuff. And ultimately, it's such a small drop in this kind of broad picture of what it is to raise this person. But maybe just something, it probably, if I was writing the letter, I'd say, I know you won't listen to this, but I know
I'm telling you anyway.
Yeah, I know you won't take any notice, because people say, oh, take it easy, just sleep as much as you can, don't worry about the sheets and the dirt everywhere, whatever. It's like, I know as a person I cannot relax unless the house is kind of reasonably tidy. I know that sounds really tragic, but like, just knowing yourself, it can sometimes be helpful. So yeah.
It's true. I mean, it's a question we ask in our groups, what would you tell your pregnant self? And people are split between, and a lot do say, well, I wouldn't have listened.
Yeah.
Because, me then knows better than me now. And it's part of that whole tapestry of kind of realizing you don't have the control. And certainly, as you say, I assumed, like most, we think, well, the baby's only small, it's going to sleep a lot, I'll be able to do this and this and this. It's like you just somehow can't. The whole hours go by, and you just be and it's, you can't understand how you've not been able to do stuff. And that is kind of, I think, if you're someone who's been quite independent and worked and traveled, and you think, I know myself, I can manage myself, it's like I can't. And it's quite unsettling. But yes, you get through it, and now you have your 4 lovely children. So if you, I like to think of like a matrescence disc, like there's island discs.
Oh yeah.
What would your matrescence disc be?
I want to make it very clear that this is not a sort of personal favorite song of mine, but what it means to me. We now have this sort of very chatty, just turned 2-year-old who sort of marches into the room and goes, "Okay, Google, play Raw by Katy Perry." I don't sort of remember 2-year-olds doing that kind of thing. Obviously, the tech wasn't available. But yeah, she's obviously got lots of older siblings, and this song she just absolutely loves, and she loves sort of being the scary tiger, and she does the sort of da 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 da, and it's just hilarious because they all prance around our sitting room and sort of bounce up and down on the sofa when it comes on, and our son sort of sits there rolling his eyes going, "Oh, can you all be quiet?" But secretly I think quite
is he the only boy? Okay.
Yes, yeah. Poor guy.
He's got his 3 unruly younger sisters.
Yeah, and at that point he's like, I'm going upstairs to read. But yeah, it's just I think again it speaks to what I was saying earlier about I love being a mum to children who are that little bit bigger and able to kind of, you know, dancing with your kids is just really joyous. And yeah, this kind of reminds me of that.
Oh, that's nice. That it's nice that they all join in and do it together. It is those sort of rare fleeting moments where you think, oh, this is it, this is the thing. I must sort of mentally take a picture of it and remember it and sort of hang, because it's, you know, you strike me, you're quite similar to me, you're always thinking forward and back. Some people it comes more naturally to be in the moment, so some of us have to force ourselves to say,
Definitely.
yeah, this is in this moment, all is well, and this is everything's working and lovely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a book about parenting called something like All Joy and No Fun. And, you know, it is a bit like that sometimes, that, you know, you get these flashes of joy, and it does obviously tick a really deep existential box for many of us becoming a parent. But yeah, there is a lot of drudge, and quite a lot of it is no fun. So when you do get these little moments of like fun, joy, and you've got to really sort of hold on to them. And that actually is something my husband has always been much better at than me, I would say, because I'm the one who's thinking about all the, you know, stuff that needs to happen next. But it's helpful
Fun
to be in
man,
a partnership with someone who can find the joy in things. So yeah.
Oh, and does he join in the dancing as well, or is that
Oh
just
yeah. Oh yeah, but he's more, you know, trying to get them into the kind of reggae and things like that. But you know, even he gets, you know, he can join in with Katy Perry now and again.
now there's an image I have. So, Charlotte, how can our listeners or viewers, how can they find so you say there's a website now for it, is there?
There is, yeah. I can send you the link that you could sort of put in the notes if that would be helpful. But you can Google my name, so Charlotte Faircloth, and just put UCL in, and it will come up. Or the project is 50 become in digits, so 50 becomingamother.co.uk. And you can see a little video there of me and Anne and Meg talking about the project, and you know, see our progress and what we're up to.
Fantastic. It's been really great talking to you, Charlotte. Thank you for joining me.
It's been really fun. Thank you.